I'm Jen Baker, and I am the district behaviorist here in Benicia Unified. And today we'll be talking about managing Zoom fatigue and some tips that you can use for keeping your kids engaged and adjusted. And we have one other participant here today. Everyone else hopefully will enjoy this from the comfort of their own home on YouTube later. A quick thank you to our technology department. Particularly Mike Sharif for working with us each week to make sure we can get those YouTube videos up for parents who can't fit it in to get here live. So before we start, each week I'm starting with this quote because I think it's so relevant for what everyone's going through right now. Working, parenting, and teaching are three different jobs that cannot be done at the same time. It's not hard because you're doing it wrong. It's hard because it's too much. Do the best you can. And when you have to pick, because at some point you will, choose connection. And this was by Dr. Emily W. King. She said this in the spring. All right, so for today, I have several acknowledgements here today because this is a little out of my lane. Like I said, I'm the district behaviorist, so usually you come to me for environmental solutions. I work on behaviors that are learned and behaviors that are reinforced, and we do environmental changes to try and teach and promote appropriate behavior. And this kind of relates, but I definitely had to do my homework for this. There was so much good information out there. There was an article in National Geographic in the spring called Zoom Fatigue is Taxing the Brain. Here's why that happens. I got information from an assistant professor of early childhood education at BU. There were several clinical psychologists at an organization called the Child Mind Institute, which is an independent national nonprofit. There was an MD that I listened to, and there was Maureen, who is a parent of a very sensitive child, and she has this wonderful website called The Highly Sensitive Child. So I got a lot of information from her as well, too. So our expectations that we do every week, we only have one participant here, and she's been here before. So the main thing for everyone else is take what works for your family and leave the rest. So what we'll be talking about today is Zoom fatigue, and specifically what it looks like and 4 things you can do to counteract it. And then we're going to branch into anxiety and feelings, and from the mental health professionals, some red flags of things to keep an eye out for, and some tips for how to talk to younger children and how to talk to teenagers about what's going on and how they're feeling. So Zoom fatigue, what it is and what we can do about it. So Zoom fatigue is a pandemic era term for the physically and emotionally sluggish feeling some people describe after spending many, many hours on video conference calls. And depending on your workday and your obligations and how easily affected you are, it can range from mild anxiety, irritability, or flat out exhaustion. National Geographic, in that article I just mentioned, said that Zoom fatigue is a real phenomenon and actually explored cognitively some of the things that make it so taxing on our brain. So meeting online increases our cognitive load because several of the features take up a lot of conscious capacity that we don't necessarily have to do when we're face-to-face with people. For one thing, we have to work a lot harder to process nonverbal cues, gestures, and body language. There are the constant technology problems and glitches. We just had one right now where I was recording and talking and my one participant couldn't hear me because I was muted. This kind of stuff happens all the time. Noise and distractions on the screen, particularly for our kids, like seeing all of their classmates up there, people talking over each other because of a delay, or kids moving around. Things can be very distracting. We have our at-home distractions that we normally wouldn't have at the work setting. We've got gardeners, pets, husbands, all kinds of things happening in our home setting. And there was some research that shows even a 1.2 second delay in someone responding to you after you've said something can cause anxiety or have people perceive the other person as either not less friendly or not paying attention, when that happens a lot online just because of the technology issues. So that's causing a lot of problems. So, how does it affect kids? A lot of the experts that I read about, or I read information they had, said that kids are affected in the exact same way that adults are, and for the same reasons. And older children, while they may be able to articulate this and identify why they're feeling the way they're feeling, younger kids may not be able to do the same thing. And may not even be aware of the connection between Zoom classes and how they're feeling. So, a few practical tips I tried to pull from the common things that everybody was talking about. And this is one that I related to right away because this is environmental stuff, which is kind of my deal. So, the first one is how to create a conducive workspace. If your child is having difficulty focusing, now might be a really good time to reassess where they are Zooming. One benefit of virtual meetings is we get to control our own environment. So we can take a look at what's working and what's not. Everybody was in agreement that you need a designated, comfortable place to work, and that will make it easier for kids to focus. Plus, it'll be more enjoyable. Set up in a space that's conducive to learning, quiet, peaceful, away from siblings or other home distractions, toys, pets, things like that. I know easier said than done. So if you can't do this for whatever reason, headphones can help focus if you can't limit the noise of what's going on in the home environment. If you're using the bedroom, it's a good idea to set the expectations of sitting at a table or desk, not lying in bed, because lying in bed is low energy, poor focus, and going back to sleep. If you're short on space, I'm not going to navigate to these, but I just did a quick search and there was a lot on Pinterest, but I found these couple of websites too that were really good. One is called The Pragmatic Parent. And they talked about if you have small spaces, 15 inspiring homeschool room ideas for small spaces. Happy Mom Hacks was another really good site that had really inexpensive organization and remote learning ideas, lots of dollar store stuff. But so if you're short on space or short on money, there might still be some things you can do to reassess where your child is Zooming. Adjusting the screen is also a simple thing that you can do. Larger screens make it easier to focus. So obviously laptops and computers are preferable to iPads, although you can use iPads. Phones are not recommended. They're just too small. Position the computer or camera at eye level, both to reduce eye strain, but also to simulate real eye contact. So if I'm looking down, that's not as socially connecting than if I'm looking up. So if you don't have an adjustable camera or a screen, they said just use a stack of books to adjust the screen. There were a lot of apps out there. And these actually aren't apps that were designed for kids. They were for adults that are trying to limit their own screen addiction and time on Facebook and Twitter and social media and that kind of thing. So, and kids multitask just like we do, and it's harder to get caught when you're online. So consider installing an app that can temporarily block social media or other websites that might be distracting during academics. These are just some of the best ones that I found: Off Time, Moment, Flipped, Freedom, App Block, and Self Control. Some have a nominal fee, some are free. And again, we have to be aware that our kids and our teens are really good at probably figuring out how to uninstall them. So you're going to want to have a conversation with your kid first, but having that on there may be able to help with some self-control. There was also a lot on adding sensory elements to the work area, because Zoom calls don't engage our body like in-person learning does. There were several recommendations about how to offset the lack of stimulation by providing some kind of a quiet, non-distracting, non-toy-like fidget that could kind of keep them busy, out of the frame of the camera. Weighted blankets, pillows. There's a little picture here of one of those wobble cushions where you can sit, but it also enables you to move around a little bit. Aromatherapies or scents that either calm or energize, or seating, like those big balls that you can sit on, like this little chair that's shown here, that help engage core muscles. That could be helpful, in adding more sensory elements. So the first one, change your workspace. The second one, something that I've talked about in all of the previous sessions, establishing schedules and routines. This is a more behavioral component. Like we've talked about before in previous quick tip sessions, losing the routines we've come to rely on can cause us stress. And it's good to have a consistent schedule whenever possible. We want to maintain predictable times for meals and academics and playtime, not only because it reduces anxiety and chaos, but also it helps kids and teens maintain the habits and the structure they're going to need when we eventually go back to in-person school. Keeping a consistent, adequate sleep schedule with predictable times to wake up and go to sleep, of course, is important. And I encourage everybody to go to our YouTube channel and watch some of the quick tip sessions 1 and 2. I did a whole one on establishing routines and creating a schedule, and a second one about how to create some expectations for different activities or routines that occur every day. Some scheduling considerations. Many of the experts, actually, I think probably all of the experts that I read, recommended frequent Zoom breaks for adults. And if adults need a break, then so do kids. Making sure to schedule in low tech time, social time, pleasant activities away from the screen. When possible, giving your child some control or choice over their own daily schedule. Obviously, they wouldn't be able to choose when they Zoom with their teacher, but there may be some other things that there can be some flexibility there and help them feel a little more empowered and in control of their day. It was also recommended that the day be broken up into smaller chunks. Spacing out the work over a longer span of days in order to reduce the consecutive hours spent in front of a screen. That kind of chunking with adequate movement in between is critical. We already talked about this. Oh, and I meant to say one thing too. I'm not sure where it is. Oh, it's in the movement section. We'll get to that in a minute. So teens and sleep. I thought this was really an interesting consideration if you have a teenager. I talked about keeping a consistent schedule, like everything we just talked about, because when you're rested, you're more likely to be alert and to be able to fulfill academic expectations. You're in a better mood, you're less stressed, et cetera, et cetera. But a couple of the experts made the point that while teenagers will do better if they get adequate sleep, you also need to be careful that they're not sleeping too much, which can be kind of the tendency when you're homebound. So rest is important, but we also need activity. So it's really a balance. A little bit more on teens. Keeping up with expectations from school can be challenging, particularly if you have a child that has ADHD, organizational difficulties, learning difficulties. So creating a realistic schedule for getting the work done in defined time periods. And again, this goes into how to build the schedule, but making sure that you're building in time to break and to socialize and to exercise and to have fun. We don't want them in front of a screen doing academics all day long. And help them by not only creating a schedule, but help them and encourage them to work on self-management. And there's a lot of different, way too much that we can go into right now. But the key principle is teaching them to do a little bit of work and then reward yourself with something relaxing. A little bit of work, do something relaxing rather than just trying to like power through where you're spending hours and hours, but it's not actually active, productive time. That's really easy to happen when you're at home. Okay, so tip number 3, this is what I was thinking of, adding in more movement. So at school, it's challenging enough for kids to have to sit in their desk all day long. But our day at school is broken up by recesses or breaks or switching centers or switching classes if you're in middle school or high school, trips to the bathroom, trips to the water fountain, PE class, whatever. And at home, I find this for myself too, is we don't need to get up and move as much. And so they might not be getting enough opportunities to move. And being sedentary can really not only affect our mood, but really drain our energy and make it really hard to focus, because all those little breaks that they get at school add up to a really decent amount of movement throughout the day. Even going to and from school is one. So I just wanted to point out, this is from the earlier quick tip sessions, but we have both an elementary and a secondary routine outline. And I just circled in red that you can see you have to put the exercise or the movement in there throughout the day, at least a couple of times. There were some really good websites that I found. One was called like different ways to do brain breaks. I mean, there were so many things out there, but these were three of my favorites. One is to just remind your kids and your teens to get up and move around. Don't just stay and push through to the next class. Get up, even if you're just going to walk or go outside real quick. And especially at lunch, take a walk, jump rope, whatever. These are three of the favorite websites I found. Go Noodle is really good for little kids. And again, they're doing a movement break. They're still in front of the screen, but at least it's moving. But there's these little music-filled videos that give them games and activities, and a lot of the teachers use it. Kids really seem to like it. Cosmic Kids has videos that students can follow along with. These are more like yoga and kind of flexibility videos. And then Move to Learn is a YouTube channel that teaches students dances that correspond with various learning objectives. So it was really kind of cool. And this is a website too. I'm not going to navigate it to it right now, but this is through Stanford University. It's called FIT, F-I-T. And this website has so much on it. So their philosophy is that there are these 4 pillars to health, physical and emotional health. So energy level, mood, food, and then movement. And so the first one, recharge, has to do with finding screen-free ways to relax and to restore. But the one that I really liked, the 4th column, you can see when you click on the resources, it takes you to the site, and they have, again, it looked like it was maybe geared toward younger kids, but I didn't go all the way down. But there were so many videos. There were like exercises, there were games, there were all kinds of things packaged really well. So this, again, is a great resource for getting creative ways to keep your kids and your teenagers moving. All right. Tip number 4, prioritizing screen time. The experts were in agreement that we need to let our kids and ourselves disconnect from the screen, adjust their schedule to create a schedule that allows for sufficient time away from the screen without back-to-back video calls. Work with your child's teachers if you have a concern about their schedule. Giving your child space to disconnect might mean taking a day off now and then. If your child's already feeling worn out because they've had school calls all day, maybe don't do the book club after school or like the optional check-in. Conserve their time and energy for the calls that they have to be at, like their academic calls. And there was even something a lot of experts were talking about, virtual play dates, because when it's not safe to play in person, you know, things are loosening up a little bit in some places, but virtual play dates are kind of a thing. But with all the time they're spending online for school, even virtual play dates can burn out kids. So we have to be choosy about what we commit to. And if you do schedule social time or virtual play dates, there were some suggestions about how to do them. And a lot of people were talking about how it's less taxing on the brain if there's fewer kids there. So it's easier to connect, the conversation flows easier, it feels a little more natural, even though you're, on screen. So try planning play dates and with your child's meeting with one or two other people instead of a larger group. And so that way you're still getting the social time, but it's not as exhausting as that might be in a big group. All right, so those are the 4 tips. So now we're going to branch into a little bit about anxiety and feelings. So recognizing the signs of Zoom fatigue. Like we talked about before, younger kids may not be aware or even have the words to explain what they're feeling and why. So, especially with our younger kids, we need to be able to see the warning signs. And some of the warning signs that experts have talked about are reluctance or tearfulness when it's time to join a Zoom call, even if it's supposed to be like a social call or a fun call or a call with a family member. Irritability or meltdowns immediately following Zoom, fidgeting, difficulty sitting still, trouble focusing beyond what's typical for your child, unusual frustration or arguments with peers during the Zoom classes, headaches, eye strain, or other physical complaints of not feeling well. And when you see these warning signs, get curious. Try to figure out, is it overall anxiety? Is it scheduling? Is it technology problems? Is it a particular subject? Because there might be a lot of things that we can tweak or adjust that could help alleviate some of these. So really get curious to figure out what's at the heart of what you're seeing in your kid. So there were some pretty specific, and again, this is more for younger kids who can't necessarily advocate for themselves or identify what's going on. So these are some really specific tips about what to do before, during, and after Zooms. So before a meeting, referring to a written schedule and giving plenty of warning time before sessions so kids have time to transition. They don't have like their play interrupted and all of a sudden they have to go to class. Knowing what to expect helps kids feel in control. Going over their school day with them in the morning, giving pre-corrections like we talked about last week. Pre-corrections are reminders as it gets closer to the Zoom time about what to expect and what's going to be expected of them. Making sure all their basic needs are met before they start Zoom. Same way as if we're going on a car trip, make sure they have a snack, that they've had water, but not too much water, that they've used the bathroom, because when we have our physical needs met, we're obviously able to focus more and pay attention better, and it'll be easier to deal with any challenges or demands. If there's any kind of stress regarding the technology or things they're being asked to do, the best solution for that is to practice, but practice when they're not on Zoom with their classmates. If they're having difficulty with the platform, practice before a meeting, make accommodations, make sure they know how to use the volume, how to turn the video off and on, how to start and leave a meeting, how to ask for help. During a meeting, one of the suggestions for kids that have been very anxious about being online, turning off the camera. But of course, any of these, you have to work with your teacher because you don't want the teacher to think that the kid is stepping away or doesn't have permission and then they call them out or whatever. So, communicate with your teacher about this, obviously. But turning off the camera takes away the pressure to be on. And especially if kids are self-conscious, they'll be less worried about how they're appearing or less distracted by seeing themselves. Make sure to, like I said, collaborate with their teacher. Try to work out a way where it's acceptable for your child to be on video, maybe for part of the meeting, and then turn their camera off for part of it so they can get used to it. But again, only do this if they're having an issue with it. It's one thing to try and make sure that you talk to your child's teacher. Speaker view instead of gallery view. If it's speaker view, then only the person unmuted and talking at the time. Hopefully that's usually the teacher will be up there rather than seeing everybody's face. It could be less distracting. Stay nearby if you can, or within earshot in case they need help. If this is not possible, then teach your child what and how and who to ask if they do need help so that they're not stuck there and feeling like they don't know what to do. It might be something that in a minute, any teacher would notice that right away if a kid was struggling and needing help. they may not be able to pick up on that as easier when they've got a screen full of little faces. So again, work with your child's teacher about this. After a meeting, give your child some time to unwind and save like the debriefing and the talking and your questions for later. Have a snack, move around, don't go right into academic work. It might be helpful to debrief with the younger kids to help them identify their feelings. But again, do this after they've had a break. Validate how they're feeling, get feedback from them to see what went well. And again, give them the space to be sad if they're feeling sad. And now we're going to go into the last section, which is all about feelings, because lots of feelings are coming up for kids that are at home and isolated and missing school and missing their friends. This is from Nermeen Dashush. She's an assistant professor at in early childhood education at Boston University. And she was talking about how this is like children, as all of us, children have experienced a loss here. And this is really sad for them, really sad, missing school activities and missing their friends. There's a lot on here, but what she makes really clear is instead of trying to fix the sadness by setting up play dates, a lot of the experts were in agreement about teach your kids to talk about their feelings instead of trying to fix it. Be open to hearing about what they're going through. She said, I do think that sometimes as parents, we try too much to make things better for our kids. And a lot of research says, though, that what really helps is trying to help kids identify their feelings. Then be on the lookout for more pronounced withdrawal, which could be a sign that your child is struggling with depression or anxiety. So our next expert is David Anderson, who's a clinical psychologist, and he was talking a lot about how to talk to your teens. So he said it's also not to be underestimated the loss that our teens are feeling, missing important experiences, sports seasons, proms, graduations, senior year. Some might be worried about missing the activities or missing their friends. Others might be really concerned about college and what it's going to look like, and applications and scholarships and being able to get all that done. And all of us are missing out on very valued activities, but he says it's especially problematic for teenagers who are wired in their brains to think about novelty and pleasure seeking and seeking out new frontiers. And so the fact that they're limited in this way is it's probably the hardest for them in a lot of ways. So again, the recommendation is give them space to share their feelings without judgment or without telling them it's all going to be fine or trying to fix it or telling them it's going to be okay. Just listen without judgment and acknowledge the real stress that they're under. And it's okay to give them reassurance that you know they're going to make it through without just minimizing it or telling them that it's all fine. Again, there's a balance there. Rachel Bussman, who's also a clinical psychologist, was talking a lot about teens and friendship. So she said for teens, friends are hugely important. Bonding with peers is one of the essential developmental tasks of adolescence. So if your teen is sulking about being stuck at home with parents and siblings, she said, try a direct conversation. Understand and acknowledge their frustration, listen and validate, and then be direct about how you can work together to make the situation bearable. So again, not, especially with a teenager, not jumping in and trying to fix it or coddle them, but really having a frank discussion about what are we going to do to get through this, and invalidating that it's really hard for everybody, them included. She recommended maybe considering, and again, this is only if it's a fit for your family, but loosening rules about time spent on social media to maybe help compensate for some of the face-to-face time. And again, that's a balance, because we just talked about the importance of like not being on a screen the whole time. So again, you have to work out what works for your family. And then encourage them to be creative about new ways to interact with their friends. Even if it goes back to like old school, writing letters or things that are or low tech. probably not writing letters, but sending a card, other things that they could do to connect with friends socially. Here's one more on teens. This is Rachel Emke. She's also from the Child Mind Institute. She said, listen. Again, this is the theme from all of the psychologists saying, like, don't just like bombard them with questions or try to fix it. Listen without judgment and validate without trying to solve it. Show trust and take them seriously. Ask them for their help with things. Don't be a dictator. Absolutely, kids need limits and boundaries, but as they get older, also explain why. Not that you have to justify, but be frank with them about why you're setting the limits or the boundaries that you are. She also said praise. She said teens need the self-esteem boost just as much as kids. And I wanted to put in here, even if they act like they don't like it. But again, you know your own kid, and teenagers tend, oh, mom. But you'll know your own kid. But she didn't want us to forget that teens need the self-esteem boost too. She talked about controlling your emotions and counting to 10 before responding in emotional situations. And I know with teenagers, especially if you've got teenagers home all the time, there's probably a lot of heated and emotional discussions. So just making sure that we're modeling control, and as hard as it is to take a breath before we're responding. Doing things together, sharing meal times, and then, like the others have said, observe for warning signs or changes that indicate some outside help may be needed. More and more parents are reaching out because kids that maybe were always kind of had a little bit of this or a little bit of that are really struggling, and you might need some outside help with that. Okay, almost done here. We've got just a couple more. This is more for younger kids, but this is Gene Barrison. He's a doctor at Massachusetts General Hospital, and he has this little 3-minute YouTube video. And again, this will be in the handouts and on the parent webpage. But he talks about 3 things that kids want to know at any age. The video is more about how to talk to younger kids, but I thought these questions were really helpful. He said, regardless of what age your child is, they want to know 3 things. Am I safe? Are the people taking care of me safe? And how will this affect my daily life? So keeping those questions in mind, because there's nothing scarier for kids and teenagers than, like I said, the lack of unpredictability and the unknown. So in summary, everybody is more stressed. It doesn't matter how old you are, but even kids. So how you'll diffuse these tensions of us all being at home all the time, it will vary by families, but it may help parents to think about, again, balancing when do we need to lighten up a little bit, when do we need to give freedom, but also remembering that we also need some structure and predictability. It's good for organization, it's good for reducing anxiety, and it's good for keeping those habits in place for when we start to get more back to what regular life is like. Some ways to get started. The first 4 were those tips that we talked about in the beginning, reassessing your child's workspace and making sure on Zoom, when they're on, academic, that they have a comfortable place to work and to do their Zoom sessions. Establish a routine, use schedules, and develop healthy habits, particularly like eating, exercise, sleep, the basics. Adding in movement throughout the day, programming it in, scheduling it in, looking at some of the resources that were included. Prioritizing Zoom sessions, making sure to take away time, take breaks from the screen, and really prioritizing turning down the things that you don't absolutely have to do so that you're fresh and able to commit to the things that you do need to do. Talking about and giving space for feelings instead of trying to minimize, fix, or solve or make it all better. And then getting curious when you see those warning signs, getting curious, trying to figure out what's going on, addressing the things that we have control over, but then not being afraid to ask for and get outside help when needed. So this is just the parent webpage. I show it each week, a couple of resources for parents. You can email me if you don't have the link to this, but I've added some new resources for stress, anxiety, and Zoom fatigue. And I also got some feedback from parents that it was more elementary focused. So I've added some new resources for secondary teenagers as well. We have office hours if you need a 30-minute consult, something specific to what's going on in your home or help implementing something on the parent web page. There is a flyer on the parent web page, and you can complete a form and request a 30-minute consult with me. And again, we have this recording. Obviously, you know this if you're watching it at home, but there are other recordings from previous quick tip sessions, which are posted on Benisha's YouTube channel. So I think that's about it for now. I hope this was helpful for you, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.